thing because I don't have a copy of my own book in front of me. And but let me just tell you some of the story how this got started. Back in the very late 1980s, I was in a bookstore and I picked up a copy of a book you probably know called Best Evidence. And as I opened this thing, I saw for the first time the Kennedy autopsy photographs. And even to my untrained eye at that point, I knew there was something wrong with these things. But it, I had watched, documentaries on President Kennedy. I read some stuff, but up until that point, I was like everybody else, and knew the official story. Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy as he was going through Dealey Plaza, and that's basically, I didn't really know a lot about the controversy behind it. I took this book home and I read it, and it gripped me so hard. Yeah, it fired my imagination so hard that I started reading everything I could on the assassination. And that's when I learned that, all the controversy about Lee Harvey Oswald, and did he do it, did he not do it, were there conspirators, So, in reading David Lipton's book, the part that intrigued me most was the part about the autopsy. And even as a kid, I always thought we would know the truth because there would be people that would come forward and they would tell us, we were there, we did the medical work, we know what happened. And so when this book came out and I read it and I read it and I read it, finally I got tired of reading books and I decided to start contacting people that were in Dealey Plaza, and that's how that started. And I just started doing firsthand research. I wanted to talk to people. I didn't want to just read it in a book. I wanted to talk to people that were there and saw what happened. And so I started doing that, and one of the first I got to talk to over the phone and then in person was Bill Newman. And then I went to Dallas in I think it was the first time it was like 96. And I had made arrangements with Bill to go see him. He said he would, he said, I've talked about it many times. He said, I don't mind talking to you about it. So when I got to Dallas, it was for NID November in Dallas, the Conway conference. I got there and first let me back up a little bit. I first went into the plaza and I'd never been there. Of course, I'd seen it, through film and TV and things like that. So I went down there and it was like a really small area, and I was thinking to myself, my God, this is a really small area. And I hadn't been there before, and I'm looking around at the buildings, and I'm just kind of taking it all in. And as I start walking down toward the underpass, I hear boom, boom, boom. And I turned around, and for a moment I thought I was in a time loop because the limousine was going down the street. And it really shook me up, and I thought, what is this? And it took me a few seconds to realize this, at the time, they had a replica limousine that you could take a ride in. For $25, they would take you the route, and then when they got to the plaza, they had a tape-recorded thing where it sounded like the gunshots. So I just, I was absolutely stunned by it. And then I grasped, oh, okay, this is not real. I'm not in the Twilight Zone. But it gave me a wonderful perspective on how fast this whole thing was. It was really fast. And I could see how people would be shook up about that. So I continued. I went up to the Sixth Floor Museum. I walked all around there. While I was, later that night, I think it was at the conference, I bumped into Ian Griggs. And we started talking, and I said, I've got to go. I've got an appointment with Bill Newman. And Ian said, as I recall, well, how the hell did you manage that? And I said, well, I called him up and I asked him. And so he said, well, we might not mean to intrude, but, do you think we could come along. He had a friend there, Mark Rowe, and I said, well, let me call him up and ask him. So I called him up and I asked him. And he said, no, that'd be fun, bring him along. So very excitedly, we got a cab and drove out to Mesquite, Texas, and met him at his home there, and Bill told us the story, and I believe that Ian wrote an article about it for the Dealey Plaza Echo. That was a number of years ago. And my research just continued. While I was there at the conference, George Michael Ivica was sitting at a table with me at some point, and I started saying, really where the evidence here is in the medical evidence, And so he said, well, would you like to go up and talk about it? And I said, well, I don't think I want to do that, but I'm here to tell you that, from what I've read, if you want to know the truth, you've got to explore the medical evidence. He said, well, how would you like to put on a panel for next year? So that gave me a reason to start calling people, and I did. I called Gerald Custer, and a few months after I got home, and he agreed to see me. Arrangements were made. I flew out to Pittsburgh. I stayed at the home of Vince Palmar through connections, and we went out and interviewed Custer. I spent 2 or 3 days with him, and his story is in the book. And I just continued. I tracked down these people. I tracked down Paul O'Connor. He said yes to me, and as did Dennis David, and finally Jim Jenkins. I tried to. So I thought at some point I thought, well, maybe I should do a book on this while I'm doing it, or at least write it down. And so that's how the whole thing started, and that's how it turned into In the Eye of History. It was just, I tapped on the door and it opened and I walked through it. So that's about it. I mean, there's much more to the story, but tell me what you want to know.
Why do you have a specific interest in the autopsy? Why do you have
I just can't.
Why do you have a specific interest in autopsy-related content?
Because I always felt that is where the answers would lie. You can have witnesses that said they saw the shooting, but that's all been gone over. The witnesses, the autopsy people, had actually spent time with the body. And if these were trained medical personnel, they should be able to tell you by looking at the wounds whether or not, where the shots came from. Did they come from the back? Did they come from the front? Did they come from the side? So that's why I was so intrigued by that. And I just went where my heart led me, in essence. I always thought that you could find out the truth, and we would find out the truth, if we could just talk to the people that were involved in the medical aspects of it, the autopsy, because they had the body for a period of time. That's why it intrigued me. I thought, well, yeah, you can find parts of it in Dealey Plaza. You can find parts of it in Parkland, where they had the body for a short period of time under stressful circumstances. But if you could get to the people that could perform the autopsy, they had the body for a length of time. They went over it, they examined it, and they could give me real answers. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to know for myself, was there conspiracy in the death of John F. Kennedy? And I cannot tell you why this gripped me so hard. But then you probably can't tell me why it grips you so hard, because you're sitting there listening to me talk about it. So we all share this one thing, that somehow the assassination of this president and what was lost has gripped us all very hard. And it still grips me to this day.
Barry, can you ask him about his interview with Gene Wheaton?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Did you do an interview?
Barry, if you could relate the questions.
Yeah, he's asking
You're
you about.
closer.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, Alan Johnson is asking. He's asking about an interview you've done with Gene Wheaton. Did you speak to Gene Wheaton at any time?
Yes.
Yeah, could you tell us something about that interview?
About Gene.
Yeah.
That was, by this time, it's years and years later. In the Eye of History had been published, and I was doing a book on. I was doing a film with filmmaker Mark Sobel. You know, sometimes things happen to us and we don't grasp that it's going to take us down roads that we never dreamed we would go. And through my work on the Kennedy assassination in my book, I managed to become involved with a noted filmmaker over here that I got to know, and I decided I wanted to do a book on Bobby Kennedy next, because I had been told, you know, once you start dealing with JFK and what happened to him, along the way you fall in love with Bobby Kennedy. And I certainly did. And so after the book had been published, through a set of circumstances, I became involved in I was going to do a book, and I happened to bump into Mark Sobel, this filmmaker, at a conference. I had talked to him before on the phone, was asked to help him in some research he was doing on another project he was working on. And so through that, we got to talking. I said, you know, Mark, I'm thinking about doing a book on Robert Kennedy. Would you be interested in coming along and filming some of the interviews I do for this book I'm thinking about? So that's how that happened. Now, cut to the future, and I have to be in California to interview some people that were involved in the RFK assassination, and so I'm there in California, and I'm staying with Mark. We had struck up quite a friendship. He's going to film some of this stuff, and before I go, I get a call from Larry Hancock, and I think you're all familiar with Larry's work. And he said to me, William, there's this guy named Gene Wheaton. We don't know much about him, although he was in papers that we have. We would like to know more about him. And since you're going to be in California, would you mind researching this guy a little bit and finding out who he is and if he would consent to an interview? So I didn't know who Gene Wheaton was. I'd never heard of him before. So I did indeed. He had a number and an address, and he sent me these papers, and so I went through them so I knew the basics, a little bit about who Gene Wheaton was. I called him up. We had a nice conversation. I asked him if I could come interview him. I was going to be in California. And so he said, yeah, you can come out here and I'll talk to you. So sometime later, I get this phone call from Deborah Conway, who runs the Lancer conferences. And she said, you know, William, we don't know much about this guy. I would love to come with you, but my husband won't let me. You know, as you know, there have been a lot of things that have happened to witnesses over the years. And now Deborah and I had a relationship from the conferences since I started writing the book. And so we knew each other pretty well. And she says, if you're going to go out and interview this guy, we think that you should make out your will. So, you know, I didn't even really pay attention to that. Not make out the will, come on, you know. So, well, being the kind of guy I am, even if I would have had to make out my will, I would have went, and so I went. When I got to California, I had set up an appointment with Gene, gave me directions, the whole thing. Well, at the last possible minute, one of my main witnesses fell through. So I decided to try to interview somebody that was, it was Sirhan's researcher, Lynn Mangan, and she lived in Carson City, Nevada. So at the last minute, I had to do some fancy footwork to talk this woman into letting me into her house and talking to me about her relationship with Sirhan. So Mark came along, we hopped a flight, we went over. Well, I had forgotten about this time frame that I was supposed to interview Gene Wheaton. So we're up, and the next day I have a wonderful interview. The next day we fly back. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I said, you know, I'm supposed to interview Gene Wheaton sometime today, but I can't remember the time frame. So I looked at my notes, and we were supposed to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was already 9 o'clock. So I called him up and I tried to explain to him what was going on, and he was angry with me. I mean, really angry. And he said, I've waited here for you all morning, and now you're telling me you're not there. So I said, look, please, I'm sorry, it's all my fault. If you'll just let me come out and talk to you for just a few minutes. So on the way there, we're like, I don't know, 125 miles from it. I said, so then we encountered, they were doing road work. So I mean, we wasted, a good part of the day trying to get to him. And so now we drive into where he's at, and he's up on this little hill. He's not surrounded by anybody. It's kind of secluded. And, we park, and I get out of Mark's car. And Mark's unloading all his camera equipment. And he looks at me and he says, yeah, I know he's angry. He said, just be charming. I said, just be charming. Okay, well, I'll just try to be charming. So I walked up to the gate, and there's Gene Wheaton, medium height, balding, gray hair on the sides, gray beard. He's dressed in a pair of sweatpants and an old gray sweat top, and I'm trying to, I'm apologizing all over myself, and he gives me the riot act one more time. Now, keep in mind that I've been told we don't know much about this to the extent that somebody tells me you should probably make out your will. I don't know this guy. Other than on the phone, I don't know him, and now I've really ticked him off. So I had to do some fancy footwork again just to get in his door. He says, all right, I'll give you a few minutes, but I don't have much time. I've got to go pick up my granddaughter from school. So he lets us in. We get into his house. Mark has this camera. He's looking at Mark. I introduce Mark. And if you've seen the interview, it's online. How I like to interview people is nice and slow and easy and comfortable. And then if I have any questions at the end where maybe I've irritated them because I keep pushing, if I have anything, I try to get it in, before they move me out the door. And so I'm trying to do this, but now I don't know how much time I have. And so I just immediately kind of jump in and hope that, he would go with it, and which he did. Now, I didn't know Gene Wheaton. I didn't know that, I didn't know anything about, that he'd been involved in the Iron Cotton scandal and things like that. It was really quite interesting. I could hear the sound.
No, it's all good.
No, carry on. No, carry on, it's okay.
Relay the question for me. Is there a question, Barry?
No, you carry on, finish what you were saying.
About Gene Wheaton.
I can't.
Yeah. Can you just finish what you were saying about Gene?
Okay. So I'm in there, and I'm pushing him and trying to get everything I can out of him. And he doesn't want me to continue really because I'm sorry, but I'm getting a lot of feedback on my
headphones.
So I'm just pushing, trying to get as many answers as I can. And I realize about, a quarter of the way into this thing that this guy is a serious guy. And that he's been involved in all kinds of things. He starts talking about, assassination attempts on his life and things. And so I'm trying to get these answers, not for me, but for Larry Hancock for his book. So, I just tried. He starts talking about how he started hanging out with these anti-Castro Cubans, and how after, about a year and a half, he'd been around so long that they just kind of considered him part of the deal, part of the group, and they would talk about it in front of how they killed JFK and got away with it. Well, now, of course, I'm intrigued because I had this. So, got what I could, and he's looking to get me out the door. And so, for some reason, he did not take a liking to Mark Sobel, my film partner. Mark came in, and we had this big camera, and this microphone that was a long, expensive microphone that was attached to and he kind of put it in Gene's face, according to Gene, and he really hated it. So Mark kept saying, can we come back? And he said, no, not right now, maybe later. In later conversations with him, he said, look, you want to come back by yourself, that's fine, we'll talk. But I'm not good, that other guy did come along with you. And, he asked me he said, don't show this film until I give you permission. Well, it really wasn't my film. I was doing a favor for Larry Hancock. And so when I got back with it, the next convention that we had, I gave them this copy of the film that we decided to movie, and they showed it at the conference. Well, word got back that we showed the film, and I hadn't asked his permission, but it wasn't me, it was Larry that wanted to show the film. I guess it was Larry. So they showed it, word got back that they had shown this film, and he said he would talk to me again, but he'd have to really think about it. And I just kind of got cut off the meeting at that point, and that's where it rested. So that's the story about Gene Wheaton.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to ask any more questions for you from the audience.
I've got one. Yeah.
Would you like to? Perhaps he can hear you.
Hello, William. Stuart Galloway here. We shared a car in 2005. I don't know whether you remember, but we were invited. I can't remember the guy's name, but we jumped in his car trying to find Campese's and drove up and down Dallas, and we could not find it. We couldn't even find our way back to the hotel, if you remember. What was that guy's name?
Dennis Borland.
That's it, Dennis. Yeah, I remember now. Anyway, we had a good trip.
I remember you.
Anyway, it's great seeing
you. Know, that little trip got him a nickname. From then on, we called him Wrong Way Borland.
I like it. Very good. Anyway, William, in your book, an excellent book, which you take word for word, you give details of exactly what people said to you. You actually said that you had not formulated an opinion on who was actually involved in the assassination. Have you changed your views on that now? Do you have an idea on who you believe actually carried out the assassination or who was responsible for it?
Well, I've come, you know, I tried to wipe the slate clean as far as what I thought I knew going into this. To the answer of was there conspiracy in John F. Kennedy's murder? Yes, I do believe there was. Have I formulated an opinion on who I think did it? I do believe that members of the CIA, not all the CIA, but members of the CIA, and probably Lyndon Johnson was involved. You know, I have no solid proof of that. Nobody does. But you know, you start delving into this stuff, and you can't help but feel that they were out to get this man, and they were going to get him, and they did. And you know, let me put it this way: I wish I didn't know what I know. It would have been far better for me in some points to not know what I know. But once you start delving into this stuff, you can, and you bump into all this, you know, talking to people like Gene Wheaton and what was really going on in the government. Talking to Jim Jenkins, you know, sitting across from this man over 20 years ago, and he starts talking to me about the autopsy. And at one point, I'm sitting there like I would be sitting across one of those little tables from you. And he says, you know, he said, we took the brain out. And he said, I was trying to infuse it. And he said, I was having trouble getting the needles into the arteries at the bottom of the brain. And he said, they looked like they were constricted because they were dry, like they'd been cut for some time. I said, what does that mean to you? He said, well, what I think that means is the brain was removed and then replaced. Well, that was my first meeting with Jim Jenkins, and the atmosphere in the room when he was saying that, the tension was palpable. I just felt it. And, you know, I tried to take it all in stride and act like I heard things like that all the time. And I wanted to fall off the chair. I mean, when you hear from these guys, Gerald Custer, the X-ray technician, one of the first people, if not the first person I interviewed, he held up a picture, an autopsy picture of a frontal X-ray that he said he took, and he said he held it up. I was filming the whole thing, and he said they wanted this man dead, and they did a good job of it. I mean, to read that in a book, someone's book, it's a totally different thing when you're sitting there with the person and they say it to you personally and with such conviction. This experience has changed a lot about me and how I think about our government and how it works and what they're willing to do sometimes. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, William.
Anybody else?
Your
Yeah. Would you like to?
Anything else?
Yeah.
We've got one other guy coming up. This is Mark.
Hello, William. I'm very curious about why the need for the Bethesda autopsy came about. Do you think that was because Earl Rose and Dallas wouldn't cooperate and he essentially stuck his foot out and tripped over the conspirators? Do you think that's why it happened? His absolute insistence that he wouldn't go along with any sort of hanky-panky in Dallas. Is that why the reason they had to suddenly take the body to Bethesda, you know, in such strange circumstances that looked like almost panic?
Yeah, it was panic. I think these guys had now this is speculation on my part, you know, but just from what I've learned, from what I think I know, I think that they had a plan. Now, it's been said that the number one thing in the plan was to make sure that John Kennedy did not leave Dealey Plaza alive. Anything could be fixed after you kill him, but make damn sure that when he goes through that plaza, he's dead. So the main thing is to kill the president, and then whatever happens, they've got control. If they kill him, if they leave him alive, hell is going to come down. Bobby Kennedy and the rest of the government would have, you know, absolute hell would have rained down on who was responsible. But once he's dead, Bobby Kennedy is no longer Attorney General. He has no power really. Who was in control then? Lyndon Johnson. So, you know, they left greasy thumbprints through this whole thing. But in essence, these guys, these conspirators, got away with it. We're still talking about this almost 55 years later, and was there a conspiracy? But when you, I mean, if you've read my book, you know about, you know, the shenanigans that took place and the coffin. There were like 3 different coffins in the morgue that night. There's the entrance of the metal shipping casket at about 6:35 to 6:38. You have a time frame for the FBI agents who said they helped carry a casket in at, I believe, 7:17. Then there's the official entrance of the casket at 8 o'clock by the honor guard. And then there's the story of an Air Force major that was brought into the morgue at some point before the autopsy started, and they were told, this is a man that is, it was brought in too late for burial. We're going to put him here in the cold room. Do not, you know, bother with it. He's already been prepared. He's just going to be buried at Arlington on Monday. And that coffin was up next to the coal boxes, and nobody paid any attention to it. But by the end of the autopsy, that casket that was supposed to stay there, that supposedly had the Air Force major or colonel in it, was gone. So I believe that was part of some hastily done scenario. So I think that they were just kind of, at some point, somebody lost control. They had control up until a certain point, and then they lost control, and they had to stitch it together as they were going, and that's why we have all these inconsistencies.
Excuse
So
me.
it's part of the reason.
Where did they lose control? Where exactly?
Well, that would be more speculation on my part. I mean, but you would think that, you know, probably it's just too much to know what was planned out and what part got botched. It had a lot to do with the autopsy. They obviously had to get to the body before anybody saw it at Bethesda. So I think that's where they really kind of lost control of the situation and had to just do things as it was moving. You know, they had to get the body the hell out of Dallas, which is what they did. And they told, you know, Earl Rose, if you don't get out of our way, we're going to walk over you. And they basically did, and they got that body out of there.
Right.
Anything else?
Yep. Come on. No. You know, when I spoke to you last night, I asked you about what it was like, and you more or less you said something about it earlier about how you felt about talking to these people directly. And did it give you any sense of they felt that they were treated badly because the official account was one thing and yet they saw something else? Did they feel very uneasy about the truth as they saw it? And the fact that their account, the truth as they saw it, has not been generally accepted, except to researchers, obviously?
Mm-hmm. Well, as to how it felt, you're just like me. So imagine yourself reading and reading and reading books, and you're a great interest in this case. And then you find yourself so taken with this that you start calling some of these people and asking if you can come see them, and they say yes. So you get on a plane and go to wherever they are, or if they want to come to you, I bring them in. So let me start with Gerald Custer. When I went to see him in Pittsburgh, you know, these guys had been dealing with this for some time, and so they didn't mind talking about it. But on the other side of it, it was like, for me, with an interest in this case, it was like almost being in front of, this is not a good analogy, but I'll say a rock star. It was like, here's this guy that actually had his hands on President Kennedy's body, and he's going to tell me, you know, about being there. That was more, it was almost, every one of these things, and the first time I ever did these interviews was like a surreal experience. I couldn't believe that I had come from just reading about President Kennedy and the assassination to actually sitting down and interviewing these people when they were talking to me. Every one of them, to a man, said that they felt like President Kennedy's body had been gotten to before they ever received it. And to hear that from these people, not just read it, but to hear it, to have them say it to you, you'd have to experience it. But it was more than I could have hoped for. I did get the answer to my question: was there a conspiracy in the death of John F. Kennedy? I absolutely do believe there was. Could Oswald have made the shot from the sixth floor window? Perhaps, maybe with a better rifle. But he had nothing to do with putting President Kennedy's body into a cheap metal shipping casket. You know, so he couldn't have done that. Later on, Paul O'Connor was a wonderful, gregarious personality. He did not know a stranger. We had a wonderful time together. We became so close through the years that he would call me every once in a while, every couple of months or every month, just to say hi and how are you, and I would do the same with him. We were going to take a trip to the Smoky Mountains together, go on vacation. That's what really means things to me now. That's what I really got out of this. Yes, I got my questions answered, but I also got the honor of being part of these people's lives as people, not just this person that saw this assassination. Yes, it was horrendous, but they went on with their lives. I mean, it was part of their job, it was part of their duty, and they looked at it like that. They weren't obsessed, you know, like I am and like you are with that period of time. They just did their job. And so, yeah, they gave me the gift of telling me what they knew, but they also gave me the gift of being my friend and allowing me to be theirs and being part of their lives. And that's what I have left today, is that, you know, I really care about these people, and they really cared about me. So, Dennis David was a wonderful person. You couldn't ask for a better person to talk to. I remember when I brought him here to where I live, he wanted to come see Oregon. So when I asked him, to talk to me about his experiences, I brought him out, and he was. And I don't know how many of you have ever met Dennis, if any, but he was talkative and friendly. And at one point, I took him around town. I had a little 2-seat convertible, and I took him around town. I had the top up, and where he looks at me and says, "You ever have the top down on this thing?" And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to not only get to know what they knew, but I wanted to know them as people, partly because I wanted to be able to test their veracity as to their truthfulness. Were they telling me the truth? You know, to do that, I had to get close to them as people. And I did that, and they allowed that, and it progressed to being truly part of their lives. I remember years later when Dennis David's wife passed away, he called. He hadn't even gotten home from the hospital, and he called and said, "Mom has passed." So I felt really honored that he would take the time to call me and tell me that, right after it happened. So you can't move through this thing without having your lives touched by these people and touching their lives. So Jim Jenkins was probably, of all the people that I interviewed, the one that really brought it home for me, the one that made me understand how they've been taken advantage of, and how they've been used, and how they've been controlled, was Jim Jenkins. He was the most reluctant, and to a certain point still is, person that I've ever interviewed for this thing. He just, he's a private person. He did not want to really delve into this again. He tried it with a couple of other interviewers, and he felt he'd been burned, that his words had been taken out of context from what he said, and he just didn't want to deal with it. It took me many, many phone calls over a period of time to get him to see me in New Orleans, close to where he lived. I flew out there, and I got the call. I was in the hotel room. There was a little restaurant there. He called me and said, "I'm in the lobby." I came down to the lobby, and there he stood. And we went to the restaurant, and I wanted to keep this fresh. I wanted to not ask him too much before I got him before the camera. And so we're sitting there having a Coke. And I had this whole scenario planned out, that we were going to have the day together, that I was going to go to some place nice in the French Quarter. I was going to set the camera up, and we were going to have this nice, long, extended conversation. And as I'm talking to him, he says, I was 19 or 20 years old when this happened. And he said, that's when I learned my country was no better than a third world country. He said, I don't trust the government, and I don't trust people, and this was the start of it. So I said, well, let's go back up into the hotel room and let's film it. And I knew what was coming next. I could almost feel it. He said, William, I'd just soon talk to you about this and not have you film it. And I was so crestfallen that he looked at me for about, it was probably 10 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. He just looked right at me. And I just kind of sat there. And I said, Jim, he says, he's just looking at me. He says, all right, William, I'll do it for you. So the decent, kind human being that he is, he went up to the room. I set the camera up. It turns out it was a brand new camera. I hadn't used it much. I made sure I had enough light. And I gone was the thing of me spending some time with him, setting this whole thing up, having a nice leisurely day. He said, my wife is going to be back in 45 minutes. So now I don't know how much time I have. I don't know if he's going to give me 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So I had a rough draft of questions I had written. So I sat down And, you know, I had developed this style of trying to be nice and easy and comfortable and then getting to the harder questions later. Didn't have time for any of that. I just started asking questions, get the answer, ask the question, get the answer, ask the question, get the answer. And, you know, prep was so. And he stayed there over 2 hours and answered my questions. And I came out of that room just everything that I believed, basically. Yes, there was conspiracy in the murder of Kennedy. That really pounded it home because I was sitting there and he was looking directly at me and he was telling me things like the brain had been removed and then replaced. It was a trance. And I came out of that hotel room, you know, continued to, knowing that I was going to go forward with this. So they felt used, but they weren't surprised by it. I mean, Jim put it this way. We were in the military. Every little thing could be. When I asked Paul O'Connor, I'm sorry, I'm trying to wait because I'm getting some feedback. When I asked Paul O'Connor, did you, you know, if you had suspicions about anything that was going on, did you talk to the commander? Did you tell him about it? He says, I didn't tell anybody anything. He said, I kept my mouth shut and I followed orders. He said, we were in the military and that's what you did. So that will answer a lot of the questions. They could control every movement of these people, that they were some, and that they could control every move was the advantage. And they took full advantage of it. So when I say there was control and planning, yes, there was control and there was planning, but something went horribly awry. And I think these people, these fellows that had this so neatly planned out, they at some point had to kind of jury-rig everything from some point. And that's why you have the different casket scenarios and things like that. The terrible thing is that despite all of that, they still got away with it. Anything else?
Yeah. Any more questions, anybody? Yeah, I
Somebody's going to have to come closer to the camera.
Yeah.
Because I'm not.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Do you think that there will be someone in the future American government that will have the courage to admit what really happened, or is it just one of those things that will never? They just cannot. No one in positions of power can bring themselves to admit that they did something so terrible. You know, is it ever going to happen? The truth, I mean, you know.
Barry, I assume that you've been following our government and what's been going on here the last couple of years.
The answer must be no, then.
I mean, hell, nobody can tell the truth about anything that's going on in our government right now. So, am I hopeful that will happen? Yeah, I still have some hope that will happen. Do I think it will happen? I'm not very hopeful on that side of it. The best we can do at this point is to do a lot of other research. And that's talk to these people now while they're still here. Because historians who have written that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John F. Kennedy in a car from a building, they're going to have to deal with everything else that's been written sooner or later. The generations that are going to go by, hopefully, will look at the work that I've done. We'll look at the work David Lifton's done. Look at the work that all these people have done that's a counterbalance to the Warren Commission and to all that lone nut crowd that's out there saying that, you know, Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Even a reasonable person that does a little bit of research in this, you know, has to come away with some doubt. But when you take it to the extent that a lot of us have, and actually talk to these people, you grasp that they were used. They were used to move around like pieces on a chessboard so that they could get away with this. I have a new witness that actually was the person that was scheduled to be in the autopsy room. They told him to go down and do the autopsy, but he'd been doing his shift, and it was toward the end of the shift, and in his words, he wanted to get the hell out of there because he could see the craziness of Bethesda that was going on. People were already showing up on the lawn, and so when Paul O'Connor and Jim Jenkins showed up, he gave them the keys to the morgue and said, "You're wanted down there to get the morgue ready for whatever's going to happen." So he literally scooted out of history by giving the keys to Paul and Jim, and they went down and took care of the morgue duties. He's in the book that I just completed with Jim Jenkins, and he tells his story and of what happened and what he knew about it. He wasn't there during the autopsy, of course, but he knew Humes and Boswell very well and worked with them. He gave one into Humes and Boswell. And also, I will tell you that he confirmed, like all the rest, we showed him pictures, Fox pictures that were taken somewhere of the body of the president, and he, like everybody else, said, I think, showed him the left profile, the one where you can see the head of the president, and it's in a head holder, some sort of brace, and there's a phone on the wall in the morgue. And he said, I remember a phone, but it was back toward the deep sink. And he said this phone had a long stretched cord on it. He said, I think this was taken somewhere else. Well, that's just, this is from a person that really didn't pay attention to this case. I mean, he's really read nothing. And the only reason he did it was that Jim was a personal friend of his. They reconnected while Jim was doing this book. They hadn't talked in years and years. And so he confirmed for us again there's problems with the Fox set of autopsy photographs. So that's one piece that's in the book.
Yes, so there's more to come out then. There's more to come out. What's the title of this book, and when will it be released?
It's called At the Cold Shoulder of History, and it will be out probably in the middle of October. I think it's the best work I've ever done. It was a true collaboration between Jim Jenkins and myself. You'll learn more about the Kennedy autopsy and what happened there than you could. I thought I had done, quite frankly, the ultimate book on what took place in the autopsy room. But now with Jim's cooperation and knowing him for over 20 years and becoming his friend, he was a little more. He let himself talk to me in comfort, and he knew he could trust me. So when he decided that he wanted to do something, he turned to me and said, "Can you help me do this?" He said, I need to leave something for, and I would like you to be the person that does this with me. I was very honored by that because Jim, to say that he does not seek, he does not seek the limelight is an understatement. And make kind of he wanted it to be kind of just a textbook of what happened in the morgue. And I fought to have him tell me about his life. And he really was so reluctant to. He's from the South, and people from the South. My own parents were from the South. And Southerners don't generally talk a whole lot about who they are. It's just not. So getting him to allow me talk about his personal life for publication. He did relent in the end. And I think what I told him, Jim, what I want to do is take you through this thing. I want people to know you as a person so that by the time we reach the morgue and you take us in, people will be with you, and it will be like looking over your shoulder at what you're experiencing. And that way, people can experience to some extent what you experience. And I think that changed. I think you did a wonderful job. It was a wonderful experience for me. Let me tell you that I don't know how much time we've got, how much time we've been on here, but we actually went back to Washington, D.C. together and took our wives, took me to Gaithersburg, where he was living at that point in his life. And he took me to route he used every morning, going to work at Bethesda as a young fellow. Showed me where his, out with his wife when they got, we visited Arlington Cemetery and visited President Kennedy's grave together. I'd never been there before. He'd never been there before. And of course, there were people all over the place. And we're standing there looking, and I'm looking at the crowd of people that are standing around. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what would happen if I told people right now that I'm standing next to the man that helped President Kennedy's autopsy. And this is it. I wondered what their reaction would be. Because it would be, here they are, they would be able to touch history. And for me, that's what I wanted to do. I touch history. And by talking to one of these individuals, you're able to really stop and just touch it. That's what I was after. And hopefully in the writings I have allowed them.
Yeah, is anybody today? Yeah, well, I think you've done a tremendous service to the research community and to the truth, and you should be commended for it. And also the people that you spoke to should also be commended, because what is most important about this case is maybe not justice. Whether we can have justice or not, I don't know. But the truth, we should always have the truth. Never too late for the truth. And thank you very much for talking to us today. And we'll look forward to reading your latest book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for doing it, William. And I'll talk to you sometime in the future. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, my friend. Take care. Be well, everybody.